This is a short video from the ONS looking at the latest on the UK labour market for December 2011. For a transcript, email info@ons.gov.uk. We are going to look at the labour market estimates for the UK in August to October 2011, comparing them to May to July 2011. Firstly, unemployment in the UK for everyone aged 16 and over was 2.64 million, up 128,000 on the previous 3 months. Employment for everyone aged 16 and over stood at 29.11 million, down 63,000, while inactivity for those aged 16 to 64 was 9.33 million, up 54,000. Looking at November 2011, we can compare October 2011 for the claimant count, which is a count of everyone in the UK that are claiming benefits related to looking for work. Note, this is not the same as everybody unemployed, as some people who are unemployed do not claim benefits. The count stood at 1.60 million in October, up 3,000 from September. We will now look at the fall in employment, comparing the public sector and the private sector. Overall, we saw a 63,000 fall in total employment between August to October 2011. Looking behind the headline figure, we can see that private sector employment increased in the 3 months to October by 5,000, while public sector employment fell by 67,000. We will now look at public sector employment in the UK since 1991, with the recent recession period shaded. Between 1991 and 1998, there is only an annual estimate available, and from 1999, this data is quarterly. We can see that after the reclassification of the banks to the public sector, there was an increase in public sector employment, and here is the line excluding the banks from the public sector. Public sector employment stood at 6.35 million in August to October 2009, the highest level over this period, and excluding the banks, it stood at 6.12 million. Since this peak, it has consistently fallen, although in more recent quarters there has been an accelerated decrease. For the latest period, in August to October 2011, total employment in the public sector stood at 5.99 million, a fall of 366,000 since the peak. Excluding banks, it stood at 5.78 million, a fall of 343,000 since 2009. The public sector can be split up into different subsectors, which we will show on this pie chart. Around 27% is employed in education, a further 26% in the NHS, 6% is in the other health and social work that is not included in the NHS, 19% is in public administration, which includes the civil service, 5% in the police, and 3% in the armed forces. Grouping all the other parts of the public sector accounts for the remaining 15%, which includes jobs in financial corporations. What we can see here is that over half of the public sector, or 3.16 million workers, are employed in education and the NHS. 19% are employed in public administration, of which 43%, or 479,000 people, work in the civil service. So, how much of the fall in public sector employment since the peak in 2009 is because of the different subsectors? Note that the total change in public sector employment does not equal the sum of the changes in different sectors, because they are individually seasonally adjusted. There has been a 62,000 fall in employment in the education sector, and in August to October 2011, the number in employment stood at 1.6 million. There was a 41,000 fall in the number of people employed in the NHS, and this currently stands at 1.56 million. In public administration, there has been a 113,000 fall in employment since 2009, including a 55,000 fall in the number of civil servants. Now bringing up the bars for the other sectors, we can see that in the sector classed as other, which includes financial corporations, there has been an 85,000 fall in employment. In health and social work, a 32,000 fall, a 22,000 fall in the number of police, and an 8,000 fall in the number of people employed in the armed forces. Finally, we will look at the annual 3-month changes in average weekly earnings in the public and the private sector over the last decade. If we first plot the change in weekly earnings for the whole economy, we can see that at the start of the period, the growth in average weekly earnings was positive. This became negative in 2009, but growth has since recovered, and in August to October 2011, weekly earnings were 2% higher than a year previous. We will now plot the line for the private sector, and we can see that the private sector was driving the fall in average weekly earnings in 2009. For the latest period, pay growth on the previous year stood at 2.1% in the private sector. Now plotting the line for the public sector, we can see that public sector earnings remained positive in 2009, while private sector earnings growth was negative. In August to October 2011, weekly earnings were 2.1% higher in the public sector than a year previous. If we exclude the banks from the public sector, earnings growth was slightly lower and stood at 1.8% in August to October 2011.